everyone, welcome to Learn English with Miss. In today's lesson, we will learn about the difference between whose and whose. What does whose and whose mean? Whose is the possessive form of the pronoun who, while whose is a contraction of the words who is or who has. Now, all of that sounds like a mouthful, I know. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper today and get to the bottom of all of this. Let's keep going. When do you use whose? The word whose is possessive, and it is often used as an adjective, which is a word that describes or clarifies a noun or a pronoun. So in this case, whose is a possessive adjective because it describes who owns something. Traditionally, whose was only used to describe a person or several persons, as in Sarah, whose dog is cute, just arrived. In this case, whose indicates which person's dog we're talking about. And yes, in that sentence, we are talking about Sarah's dog. Imagine it's raining and you grab an umbrella, only to realize later that it isn't yours. You might ask your friend, whose umbrella is this? In other words, you're asking, who owns the umbrella? When do you use whose? The first thing to figure out when deciding between whose versus whose is whether you need one word, whose, or two, whose. Substitute the words who is and then who has into your sentence. If either substitution works, whose is your word. Whose is a contraction of who is or who has. What is a contraction? A contraction is a shortened form of two or more words where the omitted letter or letters are replaced by an apostrophe. For example, whose is a contraction of who is or who has. So, when the bears in Goldilocks and the three bears ask each other, who's been sitting in my chair? It can also be understood as who has been sitting in my chair. Example sentences using whose. Who's as strong as an ox? My aunt is someone who's living in California. Tony told me who's coming to the party. Example sentences using whose. Whose dog chewed up my homework? You and whose army? The ring came from a fire whose light was as bright as a star. When I figure out whose paper this is, I'll sign it. Over time, it's become grammatically acceptable to use whose to describe things belonging to inanimate objects and places as well. For example, New York is a city whose lights burn brightly all night long. Here, the lights belong to the city. In today's lesson, we learned about the difference between whose and whose. Thank you for watching and learning with me. I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.